Tampering in the news once again, and we just have to get used to it.
You are Locked On College Football with Spencer McGlaughlin, your daily podcast on all things college football. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Locked On College Football. I'm your host, Spencer McGlaughlin. Thank you all so much for making this your first listen or your first view every day. It is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day, the number one sports podcast network out there. Thank you all so much, especially my everydayers, for making us number one. I say us because that's Stephen Willis of Locked On Ole Miss, who has some thoughts on Auburn, who we'll talk about later. A 39-player transfer portal class for Alex Golesh. Does that mean success? And USC schedule doesn't have Notre Dame. Who does it have? A group of teams that let the Trojans go to the playoff if all goes according to plan. This episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. It's the last call for football on FanDuel. Go Hawks. If you're a new customer, bet just $5. Get $200 in bonus bets if you win. So, Stephen Willis covers Luke Ferrelli now, linebacker at University of Mississippi, because nothing means anything anymore. I mean, Kenny Minchie flipped away from Nebraska. I don't know if it got quite as far as the Ferrelli situation did, but he was a transfer from Notre Dame, committed to Nebraska. We're thinking, oh, the Cornhuskers have got their Dylan Raiola replacement. And then Kentucky pulls the rug out from underneath him. And Dabo says, well, I got to use the portal. I mean, this past season didn't go well. I've got to be able to, oh, look, we got a former freshman standout in the ACC. He's coming to Clemson. All right, we got him. Look, he's on campus. There he is. And now he's in Oxford. Stephen Willis, this is just the world now, right? There's no massive enforcement mechanism that is going to get rid of this, whether you think it's good or not. I think the Ferrelli situation is an evolution from the traditional tampering model, which has been just so ingrained in the sport. I haven't cared, but I don't think any of this is going to get changed. Do you?
No, I don't think any of it's going to change because nobody wants to be the bad guy and nobody wants to get sued because whoever gets lit up the first time is going to obviously sue. And they have all the receipts for people coming after their roster. Ole Miss was the most tampered with program in all of college football during the month of December. And they have receipts to prove it. And if this goes, there'll be a mutually assured destruction that happens along the way there. Now, I do think in this situation with Ferrelli, Dabo learned a lesson. He's going to talk about tampering and all of that stuff. But the reality is he just committed a player under transfer rules, just like it was 2017, and didn't have him sign anything, a contract like Darian Minso to where he'd get a buyout of what was going on. He didn't do any of that. And because of that, Ole Miss was able to just get him because all he had was financial documents, a grant and aid from Clemson. And so that is weird. That would probably hurt because you were trying to negotiate out a rev share or an NIL deal with that player. And now there's no buyout money. Listen, Ole Miss lost Princewill Umanmielen on the last day of the transfer portal. He was signed with Ole Miss. He signed a rev share agreement on January 6th. On the 15th, he's going to LSU. LSU has to pay a buyout of north of $500,000 on that. They lost Devin Harper, an offensive lineman that was signed. He is at LSU now. They have to pay a buyout for Devin Harper. Ole Miss lost Chris Jones, a transfer that was coming in. Ole Miss had a linebacker, obviously, the guy that Luke Ferrelli kind of replaced on the roster was signed. They did everything. Florida State gave him a $600,000 offer. He is at Florida State now. Ole Miss's roster has been unbelievably tampered with, but the righteous indignation happens over this one thing, over a player that wasn't as financially taken care of as another player just because there were some timestamps and a log that was read out in a press conference, and just it formed righteous indignation all over the country. Now, I'm not for tampering. If there's something that can be done about it, do it. But if you want to selectively enforce punishment on somebody over everybody else with all of this evidence that is out there of everybody doing it, that's not going to fly. And I don't think that in that situation, Ole Miss would be willing to roll over this year either.
It feels like for Ole Miss fans, based on what you're saying, there's a sentiment of you're finding no love lost here. You know, like when the officials feel like they've been one-sided all game and then there's a bad call that goes the other way, the fans who feel like they've been robbed several times are sitting there going, yeah, how does it feel to be on the other end of that? Now, the reason that I wanted to have you on the show today and bring all of this up is because John Canzano reported that Ole Miss tried to go get a wide receiver from Fresno State, their leading wide receiver from a year ago. He's decided to stick with the Bulldogs, who I just want to throw this out there for everybody, are a sleeper college football playoff contender in 2026. Matt Entz is their head coach. He's really good. They had a good year this past season. That's neither here nor there. So do you think that Pete Golding is willing to do all of this and ignore anything because there is no major enforcement mechanism? Because a major college program, Stephen, has not been penalized in a severe way to disincentivize the tampering, right? So is Ole Miss just looking at the world and what just happened with Lane Kiffin, feeling scorned a little bit and saying, you know what, we're just going to go scorched earth and do whatever it takes to win because that option's available to them?
Well, I'll put it to you like this. There's no guarantee that that happened in recent times during the portal or anything like that. It could have happened way back in December or even November. When Ole Miss beat Oklahoma in Norman, it was a big day for Winston Watkins, the true freshman receiver out of Florida, against Oklahoma, really performed. After that game, immediately after that game, 3 or 4 schools reached out to that player about down the road, kind of pre-portaling of what is going on. So I don't know that Pete Golding did this with the Fresno State thing, if it indeed happened, because we don't know the exact timeline of it, because it's very well, it could have been the middle of November and it could have been Lane Kiffin's organization doing that. So you just don't know. That's the reason it's hard to trust one side of this situation, because it's completely ignoring everything else. Just because you have times and it sounds official, that's not an indication of what the actual evidence states of what's going on. Yes, I think every G5 program probably feels aggrieved right now, because anytime they have a player that is really good, he is going to get poached. That's just the way it works. And when it goes the other way, maybe there's a desire to take a victory lap. But I think we need to be careful about everything that has been allowed to perpetrate by the NCAA over the last 4 or 5 years, because this wild, wild west that we live in, that is not something that happened overnight. It has incubated and fostered itself to get bigger and better over the course of the last 5 years, to the point where I don't know that coaches feel like there's an enforcement mechanism out there that they can turn to. That's the reason they're doing the Dabo righteous indignation thing with no real evidence going on, because they need some guardrails somewhere. And it's one of those things, don't hate the player, hate the game, because this is the system that has been built by the NCAA, the chaos that they manufactured trying to get an antitrust exemption from Congress and all of that. It is starting to get out of hand, but I don't think that Ole Miss should in any way be the face of what's going on. And it feels like that is what everybody's trying to do right now that they can kind of pin it on that group and Ole Miss being good. Because Spencer, in 1994, Ole Miss went on probation, the second worst penalties they gotten since SMU. That was right off of a Gator Bowl, them getting good, starting to affect some of the blue bloods. In 2014, 2015, Ole Miss beat Alabama back-to-back years, ended up going to the Sugar Bowl. They were number 3 in the first college football playoff rankings. Probation knocked them back down. Ole Miss fans are very wary of the NCAA trying to keep Ole Miss in its place. And this year, I don't think they're going to find a willing partner if Ole Miss is going to be the face of this tampering thing. And it might get ugly if they want to go that route.
Has Pete Golding handled himself in the situation in the way that you'd want the Rebels head coach to do it?
Yes, I don't think that Pete needs to insert himself into the drama. I get that the media and everybody else wants to talk about it, but the reality of it is Ole Miss had more players going out by worse circumstances than the Luke Ferrelli situation. Yes, Clemson feels aggrieved. Great. I'm sorry that you feel that way, but Pete Golding does not even need to speak on this issue. He needs to go out and recruit. And as we see from the shark emojis, he's doing a pretty good job of that.
Stephen Willis, Locked On Ole Miss, doing a great job covering the Rebels as always. Speaking of such manners and actions in the SEC, we're going to Auburn next in a completely unrelated matter, right, Stephen? There's definitely no correlation. That's a coincidence. I planned that by a complete and total. It was an accident. It was a great accident.
No tampering there. No tampering there.
Certainly not. What is happening at Auburn? That is coming up next.